Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode number 96 of the podcast for August 2nd, 2010. My guest today is Pascal Dennis of the firm Lean Pathways, Inc. Pascal is a professional engineer, author, and advisor to North American firms making the lean leap. Pascal developed his skills on the Toyota shop floor in North America and Japan, and by working with major international companies. And he's also a faculty member with the Lean Enterprise Institute. Pascal is the author of books such as Lean Production Simplified, Andy and Me, and Getting the Right Things Done. And today we're talking about his new book, which is a sequel to Andy and Me. The book is called The Remedy. So as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Lean Blog podcast. Well, Pascal, it's great to have you finally as a guest here on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Mark. Thanks for the invite.
Sure. So I want to talk about your new book, The Remedy. I was wondering if you could start off by giving us the setup to the story and how it's a follow-up to a book. Many of the listeners, like myself, may have read a book called Andy and Me.
As you say, The Remedy is a sequel to a book I wrote 5 years ago called Andy and Me, and it's further adventures of Tom Pappas and Andy Saito, I suppose. 5 years ago, they took on the challenge of saving an automotive plant, New Jersey Motor Manufacturing, and since then, the plant has really thrived and prospered through lean principles, and the plant is doing extremely well. But the mother company, Taylor Motors, is in terrible shape. In fact, they're bankrupt and subsisting on government handouts. So Rachel Armstrong, who's now senior vice president, asks Tom, who's one of her best leaders and most original thinkers, in her view, to take on a bigger challenge. She asks Tom if he would become the SHUSA, or the chief engineer or key thinker, or whatever term you want to use, for an entire platform, an environmental car that Taylor Motors is launching and desperately needs to succeed, because they not only have to pay off their government loans and get out of bankruptcy and solve all their other problems, but they've got to make a splash in the marketplace to regain the trust of their customers, all the people that are wondering what's happening with Taylor Motors. Are my warranties going to be honored? Is it going to disappear entirely? There's tremendous uncertainty, so they have to make a splash with the new environmental car. That's the background.
And it's a book that's clearly about transformation challenges and culture and management styles. One of the things I appreciated was how you pointed out right away. I mean, it's an important point. It was right on page 2, this idea in the story that nobody will lose their job because of improvement work. I was wondering if you could talk about that as a general theme and philosophy with Lean, and how that fits in, maybe with a company that is going through some real difficult business challenges.
Well, in order to do extraordinary things, you have to involve all your people. And that's blindingly obvious and usually ignored. It's a very strange thing in my view. We want to motivate our people by laying off a whole bunch of them and shutting down sites and offshoring work. So if we accept that, then we've got to make that promise up front, and we've got to keep the promise. And then if you've got good values, if you have a strong sense of who you are as a company and as individuals, you have a chance to motivate everybody and focus them on a great endeavor, something remarkable. And you have a chance to break through. You have a chance to be in the top 1% of companies. But that's only possible if you've got the trust and the regard and the faith of all your people. I mean, it's it's transparent to me. For some reason, it's hard for some people to accept. They think, well, you got to cut jobs and cut factories and bleed the company down, and that's somehow tough management. I just think it's dumb, personally.
A lot of people in the lean community have been talking about this for a very long time, this idea that you say is blindingly obvious. Is there, there's got to be a mental model or something that's a sticking point from getting people to see that that's a necessary part of a lean transformation, that commitment and that trust? Or what would you say gets in the way in the real world?
I think, as you say, Mark, dysfunctional mental models get in the way. And you and I have talked about them at length. Leaders, for example, not accepting that their role is to develop capability in their people, in their machinery, in their processes, in their supply chains, and many other dysfunctional mental models. And they're described in detail in the book, Getting the Right Things Done. But I think one thing that has struck me increasingly in the past few years is a root cause of this foolish and incessant downsizing and bleeding down of the company's assets. A root cause of it is that we are outsourcing not just production, but also thinking. We are outsourcing our thinking, and we're doing so to so-called pundits that we see on TV, or consultants that are that you have to offshore everything, and they show us complex algorithms which seem to make sense. And rather than saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense at all, we accept the conventional wisdom and we outsource our thinking. So everybody, lemming-like, follows the so-called leaders. And then, a decade later, or two decades later, we don't know how to make things anymore. We lose core skills like machining, like foundry, like core design and interesting assembly and reassembly and such high-level skills. We're outsourcing thinking.
Mm-hmm. And I guess on the theme of maybe better thinking or lean thinking, it seems one of the main themes of the book, The Remedy, is how to get flow across different business functions. That it seems maybe the challenge for Taylor Motors is not just a narrow lean production challenge or about implementing lean tools. That maybe that's not enough in a lot of real world cases. So I was wondering if you could talk about that theme without giving away, I guess, the end of the story. If you can touch on why that's an important theme in the book. One of the villains in the book is big company disease. And big company disease manifests in a number of ways, and most obviously, as you suggest, in disconnect between divisions, between functions, between people that normally should be working together as customers and suppliers, internal customers and suppliers. So big company disease causes a thick and anesthetizing fog to envelop the company. You can't see upstream or downstream. You can't see your biggest problems. And lateral connection, which is how value flows, is lost. And again, this isn't through ill will or anything, but people wanting to do a good job will optimize what they can see, because the old adage, out of sight is out of mind. If I can't see upstream or downstream, I'm going to try to make my little corner better. But that generates the problems you're talking about. Silo efficiency. Unit efficiency does not equal overall efficiency. So the challenge is, how do we cut across complex organizations with multiple sites and multiple divisions and multiple silos and multiple countries and continents, and create a line of sight between the customer and what they want and what we do, and connect everything. And then you can pull and flow and start to harvest all the opportunities that lean makes available. Now, I think it's one of the points that people miss, even if you go back to the machine that changed the world, that a lot of times people say, okay, even the subtitle of the book, The Story of Lean Production, and they think factory floor quality and factory cycle time. But even in that book, it talked about Toyota's product development cycles being so much shorter than the big three. Can you share a little bit of your experience at Toyota, maybe in terms of applications of what we would call lean outside of the factory floor, or how some of those connections were made across different parts of the company?
That's a great question, Mark. Just to underline what you're saying, the lean business system comprises three systems: the design, make, and sell subsystems. But most of the attention, as you say, has been on the middle one, on the make system, the so-called Toyota production system. But the design and the sell systems are at least as important, and some people say more important. So here's what I saw working at Toyota of the outside the factory connections. We would regularly connect with our chief engineer, or Shusa, for the models we were making, the Corolla and the Solera, for example. And the Shusa's job was to wrap his arms around the entire Corolla or Solera platform. And that's wrap his arms around the upstream elements, design, sales, marketing, all the way downstream to the distribution system, right down to the dealers. And, he had a small team of people, but on a regular cadence they would visit us, pre, during, and post launches, whether they were major model launches or model refreshes. And he would connect with us on our top 10 quality problems, our top 10 ergonomic problems, our top 10 assembly problems. And they'd also go to our sister companies, Numi, for example, or Toyota Turkey, or other companies around the world that were making the Corolla, for instance. And thereby they would identify hotspots upstream and downstream of the in the value stream, and be able to develop great insight. For example, I've no doubt the Shusa would say, look, the way we have designed the body here is generating all sorts of ergonomic problems downstream in manufacturing. Moreover, it's generating these machine problems way over there in machine design. So the Shusa was able to zoom out and see the entire value stream: design, make, sell, and make connections other people couldn't. And the bottom line for us was, at the next iteration, the next model refresh, the problems we had identified were gone. We didn't have to deal with those quality problems or ergonomic problems or machine problems that we did before. So literally, we got better every day. It's continuous improvement. And that wouldn't have been possible without that Shusa function, that person who wraps their arms around the entire platform, including design, make, and sell. That's probably the most obvious one. There are a number of others, but the whole point was clearly to generate a holistic understanding and connection with the customer.
And it might be fair to say that's a part of the big picture system and the overall business system that many organizations didn't learn from if they were just doing production, lean production, without looking at the lean business system. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think, with the best of intentions, a lot of companies have sub-optimized, but it's not, too late by any means. In fact, it makes good sense to learn the lean system first in manufacturing before you go upstream and downstream into the make and sell parts of the business, because this is a key point. In manufacturing, waste is usually visible. Scrap waste, for example, in the auto business means a big pile of scrapped out car bodies. And, wise companies put them in a prominent place, so you walk by them every day and say, holy cow, did we make those? Gee, we do something about that. By contrast, in business processes, scheduling, planning and scheduling, say, a bad schedule looks the same as a good schedule. There's no way of recognizing the defect waste. Similarly, a forecast, a bad forecast and a good forecast look the same, So in business processes, you can't see the waste as easily. So it makes sense to start in manufacturing, but don't stop there. Go downstream into the sell and upstream into the make phases as well.
Yeah. Now, one thing you touch on early in the book is some of the resistance. You start looking at applying lean outside of the factory floor. There's all sorts of either cultural challenges or people being afraid of being turned into robots. What are some of your experiences about ways that listeners might be able to work past that concern if they're hearing that in, let's say, sales and marketing of a manufacturing company, or if they're hearing that in healthcare or some other service setting that's clearly not a factory floor?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're quite right. As you move upstream and downstream of manufacturing, you run into obstacles. On the plus side, the people are really smart, and once they learn the fundamentals and get past some of those obstacles, they take to lean very, very quickly and happily. Some of the obstacles are as follows. There is a fear, as you say, that standards are straitjackets. My job as a designer or as an engineer or as a salesperson will be devalued if there's a standard. So a couple of points there. We have to apply lean fundamentals with finesse and intelligence when we get into knowledge, and recognize that there is a high element of artistry in jobs like doing sales or surgery or teaching or interviewing somebody. So there is an element of artistry. That's not to say we can't apply standards. We can, and we're very successful with them, but we have to have finesse. For example, in a surgery, we work with the surgeons to identify the 10 critical elements. These things have got to be there in order for us to do an effective surgery. And the surgeons figure out what the content of the work is, but we trust them to make decisions on the fly. If there's a hemorrhage, you expect the surgeon to skip step 3 and 4. And, that's what you want. You don't want them robotically to follow this sequence. Similarly, you don't expect a teacher or professor to robotically follow an agenda. If there's a great learning opportunity, they can implement a teach-back or a group activity or case study or tell a story. And that's what makes for a great surgeon or a great interviewer or a great teacher, That's another, that's a core obstacle. Another obstacle to moving lean outside the factory is, as I said, waste is invisible outside the factory usually, so it's much harder to see and to begin problem solving.
Right.
A third obstacle is, in many areas outside the factory, there isn't a history of Kaizen or an expectation of Kaizen. In the factory, people know every year we got to get a little better, and we've got probably 20 years of experience. But that may or may not be true in your marketing shop or in your design shop or in your sales or customer service area. So you've got to germinate the soil so that Kaizen can take root. But as I say, the people are very good and smart, so they usually pick it up pretty quick. But again, finesse is the key.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Having the finesse to help explain to people the idea of flexibility, and what you described clearly does not sound robotic. That having a standard plan doesn't mean zero deviation from that, regardless of what's happening around you. And maybe a final question just on that thought. What was your experience? Even in a production setting, I think one challenge is that a lot of people hear about lean manufacturing. They've never been in a factory, and so it's kind of hard to translate. And they think, well, in a factory, yeah, people are robots, but it seems in a good lean factory that's not the case. Would you agree?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A good lean factory or a lean surgery or a lean law office or a lean design shop is a place where you riff. I'm a musician, so the standards for me, the sheet music or the scales, are just a foundation for creativity. And without the sheet music and without practicing the scales, you can't really do anything creative. All you create is noise. So the best factories that I've had the privilege of working at are like orchestras, like an auto plant, welding, stamping, welding, paint, plastics assembly are like, the woodwinds, the violins, the timpani, et cetera, and they're working together with a rhythm called tact time, and they're always getting better because tact time and all the other lean concepts make problems visible. So they're riffing all the time, and it's not at all robotic. In fact, it's the opposite of robotic, and for me, it's one of the high points in my career is being part of companies that are able to do that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned timpani. I used to play in orchestras. I'm a percussionist, and there's classical music where the sheet music is what it is as an individual performer. Most conductors would not want you improvising, but the conductor has a lot of leeway. If you hear the same symphony performed 10 times by 10 different symphonies, you're going to hear different tempos, you're going to hear different interpretations of that music. But then if you look at say jazz, I mean that still has structure. People who don't know jazz might think, oh, they're just they're being completely free form and completely making it up when most jazz compositions have a structure that you improvise within. So maybe I don't know if I'm butchering the analogy you were beginning, but different settings have a different amount of improvisation built in to the structure and the expectations that people working in that system might have.
Yeah, exactly right. And the amount of improvisation, or the amount of kaizen, if you will, on a given day probably depends on the nature of the industry. I'm off the top of my head, if the situations are life and death, you probably want to stick pretty close to the fundamentals. Say in a surgery, you better make sure the critical 10 things are done. In sales, though, it's not life or death, so you might be able to riff a little bit more. That's not to say that in the surgery, once you've completed the work, you have a debrief, you identify opportunities. It's not to say that you're not going to implement them, but in the heat of the moment, you probably will be less likely to completely riff. And the point is that standards do not constrain creativity. They allow creativity both in the work and supporting the work. Another metaphor I use is just imagine the Rolling Stones. They're 149 years old now, and they're on tour again. So, how do they do what they do? Can I suggest that they are surrounded, protected, supported by standards? For example, they're doing 200 dates in a given year. I assure you there is a standard way of unloading the trailers and setting up the stage and doing the sound check and tuning the guitars and keeping track of Keith, and etc. Now, so they're nestled and protected by standards. Now, even within the performance, they have all the stuff we talked about, the sheet music and the scales and etc. Now, they may alter their performance. A given song will probably be done different in Rio de Janeiro than in Minneapolis. That's entirely right. Different atmosphere, different air, different audience. You're likely to react and riff or kaizen. But standards still are the foundation of what the Rolling Stones or the Chicago Symphony does, or a great factory or a great design shop. It's all the same.
Well, there's a lot of great points on the subtlety and maybe, as you call it, the finesse of the lean approach and the lean philosophy and how to help transform an organization. A lot of that can be found in your earlier books, Andy and Me, Getting the Right Things Done, and more so now in the new book, The Remedy. So I want to thank you for joining us, and maybe as some closing thoughts, Pascal, if you could remind people of the full title of the book, different ways that they can purchase the book and find you online.
Thanks, Mark. It's always a pleasure chatting and working together. The book is called The Remedy, Bringing Lean Thinking Out of the Factory to Transform the Entire Organization. And I guess the easiest way to get it is online at Amazon.com or at BarnesandNoble.com or at BooksAMillion.com or any other on-site stores. You can also get it at your local bookstore. And had a lot of fun writing the book. Hopefully it'll be helpful to people. And I'm very much obliged to you for the invite, as always.
Well, sure. Happy to have you. And if people want to find you online, your general website?
Well, thanks for reminding me. As a matter of fact, we have a new website, which I'm very proud of, www.leanpathwaysinc.com. That's www.leanpathwaysinc.com. And we've got all sorts of neat stuff there, all sorts of downloads and educational materials and teaching aids and a bunch of other useful stuff. And do feel free to partake. And for listeners, good luck with all your activities. And just keep going and getting a little better every day.
Well, thanks for those thoughts and sharing your time with us. Pascal Dennis, our guest today. Sorry it's been so long. Hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast again. There's an awful lot we could talk about.
That'd be great, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.